Earlier this year, I made a video called Can I Survive 100 Days in a Lycanites World? The short answer to that question was no. It all went wrong right at the last minute. Now, I did say a while ago I would come back and do a rematch of this challenge, and here we go. I am back. Bigger mod pack, bigger weapons, better magic, and many more creative ways to kill off all these annoying creatures that will be swarming me. So, will I survive to day 100 this time, or will this challenge just once again prove to be too much for me? Make sure to watch to the end to find out. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, it really will help the channel out. Right, here we go again. Brand new start, brand new world. Let's get going. My first goal was to find a village, but unfortunately the first one I found was a dead village, so no good here. I did manage to grab a bed though, and get a few pieces of free food, which would just keep me alive. The only thing I could really do here was just get some starter tools and starter equipment. In this leatherworks, I found a scarf of invisibility and some leather armour, which in this world would be about as good as paper. It wasn't long until the first of these creatures decided to have a go at me. Thankfully, it couldn't really do too much damage. A couple of axe blows and it was down. While collecting wood, I managed to make this Entangry. These things love to jump out of trees. Again, with an axe, it's not too hard to take one down. Next up, I found one of these Apotheosis towers, which have some really nice loot in the top, as long as you don't set off the TNT traps. So I quickly disabled those, and then looked to see what I could find. Some reinforced diamond boots were a nice start, and a couple of enchanted books. I quickly found the second tower for an iron pickaxe of lights, and a couple more enchanted books. Enlightenment 5 was a real boost. The third tower I found gave me a mythic quality item which would boost my health and my armor toughness, and was apparently unbreakable. My luck was definitely in this time, because in a nearby villager camp I found a vampiric glove, which would give me life-stealing abilities, and it would come in so clutch later on. I used the iron I found at the camp to make a new set of armour, and now I was feeling pretty good about my survival chances. At a nearby village I set up a whole load of chests next to a waystone so I could travel around the world as much as possible and bring back as much loot as possible. I immediately came across a pillager factory which was completely undefended, so I proceeded to steal pretty much everything I could find, including their food, and of course their diamonds, which are always helpful. There are loads of sneaky little chests hidden in these places that give you all sorts of really good loot if you know where to look for them. As the pillagers tried to take revenge, I decided to set this iron golem on them. Well, that's what you get for locking a golem in a cage. And next to the creatures to try and have a go at me was this really weird banshee creature. Something that has been the bane of my life in previous challenges. This one was no threat, however. I decided to make my adventuring easier by crafting one of these backpacks and then upgrading it to a tier 2 backpack. It wasn't quite as good as an ender bag, but it was definitely more than I had before. On my travels I came across this graveyard, and what would I find? A totem of undying. Lovely. I had a brief moment of concern where a couple of Joust alphas decided to come after me. Thankfully I managed to make an escape through the water and get away from them before they could do too much damage. Another Apotheosis tower, and I found a sniper's bow, which would go on to be a very useful weapon later on. I also found the Endless Quiver enchantment, which really would be a boost. I had another slight moment of concern when this Reaper jumped out of my bed, and it gave me blindness, and I couldn't get inside, and almost got caught out by the monsters spawning at night. Thankfully I managed to get in before anything could find me. All I had to do now was to wait for that dragon to despawn, and then I could move on. I carried on travelling around the world, collecting as much as I could, including some useful onyx gems. I picked up any spare waystones I could find, because I'd need them later on. After that it was just a case of travelling around as much as I could, finding as much as I could, looting it all, and taking it back to base where I could put it all to good use later on. On the way around I made sure to pick up a few blocks of crying obsidian, because I would need this to make the Enchanting Infuser, something I really wish I'd had in the previous challenge. I then got extremely lucky when I managed to find more onyx gems, but also a thorn pendant, something which repeatedly saved my life in the last challenge and would do so again in this challenge later on. It was now day 11, I'd amassed a pretty decent amount of resources, a lot of stuff I could put to good use. It was a bit less than I was hoping for, but I had enough to make an enchanting table and an anvil. I got straight to work on those. I decided not to bother with a normal enchanting table and go straight for the Enchanting Infuser because it's just so much more convenient despite the extra levels it uses. I was going to have to do a lot of level grinding to make this work, so I got started on making a farm for breeding animals for easy XP, and of course a Spriggan decided to jump out at me. Thankfully, my sniper's bow was able to take it down. It wasn't long until another Spriggan jumped out at me. This was going to be a theme of trying to clear the land. I decided to go for a more conventional method of getting XP just by spamming Fletcher villagers with as many sticks as possible for emeralds. I then completed a second ring of bookshelves around the Enchanting Infuser, which would give it now a maximum power of 30. I immediately started by getting the enchantments on my special diamond boots, but it was going to take all of my levels. I decided to add the Enlightenment 5 enchantment that I found earlier to my diamond boots, which would now massively accelerate the rate at which I could get XP while grinding. Once again, the Ents were not happy about the number of trees I was cutting down to do this. The special coloured one even jumped out at me now. I felt a little bit special. Once again, they don't really like axes and they die pretty easily. I started working on enchanting a full set of diamond armour, making sure to put enlightenment on each one, meaning I would get more and more XP the more pieces I enchanted. I also decided to level up a butcher for a much better source of food than bread. I also leveled up this hunter villager, who would now give me things like blaze rods, magma cream and even ghast tears at higher levels, and didn't even have to go to the nether for them. Well, I don't normally attack peaceful creatures. This aspid was poisoning all my villagers and I did have to chase it out of the village and unfortunately kill it. I couldn't afford to let it undo all my good work. A few days of grinding later, I had a pretty good set of armour, a pretty good sword and a powerful bow. I was ready to go adventuring. The next step in the journey was to hunt down as many of the creatures as possible that dropped meat, because some of these meats gave really good beneficial effects, such as regeneration, or rebounding, or absorption. Even these unusual things dropped useful meat. I'm really not sure I'd ever want to eat one of those though. As usual, all the slaughter attracted quite a few reapers, which just continuously ambushed me all the way through this part. But my new bow could take them down in 2 shots, so they were less scary than before. I started hunting Arosaurs, because their meat would give rejuvenation, which would increase my healing. Now I moved into cold biomes and I started killing Yetis because their meat would actually give me the resistance effect. All of this meat would need cooking, so I decided to stop by and get some coal. Fortunately I forgot that Geonacs were a thing. I got jumped by one of those, that wasn't fun, but again, they're not that strong. And finally I started slaughtering jousts because their meat gives you speed effect, which is really useful in tight situations. Once again, these reapers decided they wanted a say, but again I chased them off. I came across another graveyard and another Totem of Undying. That was my 3rd one now. I had a look inside the graves and found a random god apple lying around. And there was a Fire Aspect 4 book in there which I wouldn't actually end up using. Now that I've managed to find some gold in the world, I upgraded my backpack to tier 3, which would give me another chest's worth of storage space. The next graveyard I found had 2 Totems of Undying in it. I don't think I've ever seen that before. And if that wasn't enough, the next Apotheosis tower I found had this absolutely broken netherite axe of divinity in it. This was going to be very, very helpful in some of the battles to come. Finally, I needed to kill some of the vanilla Minecraft mobs for their meat because it could be used to make taming treats for some of the Lycanites creatures, and I definitely wanted to do that later on. I also took advantage of another feature of the Enchanting Infuser, which allowed me to put any enchantment I wanted on a book. Of course I went for Sharpness 5 because I would need it for my special netherite axe. It took a lot of levels to get that on, but it would be worth it. I still wasn't done getting absolutely stacked in this world. Now it was time to go hunting underground for some artifacts. But underground caves in the Lycanites world are pretty dangerous. Thankfully I was warned by my chat that there was a grue behind me. Nasty things those, but thankfully not too much threat now. And this unusual green rat creature came at me and gave me this chaos effect which made me randomly move around in different directions. And then I got attacked by a chupacabra. Yeah, nasty creatures those, but thankfully I was well defended against it. once again I found myself getting stupidly lucky when I found these night vision goggles in a mineshaft chest. No more grooves sneaking up on me from the darkness now. Even so, underground is still pretty scary with this mod installed, and there were all sorts of crazy creatures around that were just waiting to eat me. I even had time to get attacked by creatures from other mods, such as this ghoul from the Graveyard mod. And as for this, well... I mean, at this point, it basically becomes a horror game. I was not going to stick around in this place once spectres started coming at me. That was the last straw. It was time to get back to the surface. Back at base, all my meat was finally cooked. I now had enough meat to make stacks and stacks of treats for taming creatures, as well as meat I could use later on in battle. I made sure to get at least 3 stacks of maca meat because the absorption effect they give is really useful. Now it was time to start the taming process, so I worked on beast treats, avian treats, and even some imp treats, which I wouldn't actually end up using, but the others would come in handy. Before I started taming creatures, there was one last thing I wanted to do, and that was to upgrade to an even higher set of armour, so I started searching for moonstone. Though it's an extremely rare material, it spawns at every Y level, so anywhere that has exposed stone you can usually find a little bit of it, especially in mountain biomes. And then, of course, it was back to level grinding, which I spend so much time in these videos having to do. But I now had a set of armour that was way above diamond and actually even superior to netherite. Once again, I got really lucky on a random trip around the world, finding this villager hat. Unfortunately, I'd already done all the trading I needed to do, so it wasn't going to be that helpful. A few more levels, and I had the full set. Now, I felt ready for absolutely anything this world had to throw at me. I'm about at the halfway point in the challenge now, and it's time to start taming my first creatures. So I set up a little hidey hole, and, well, they just came at me from absolutely everywhere. Nighttime in the plains is very dangerous with this mod installed. Although the plan was to tame these creatures, you can't actually tame them until you've reached level 2 knowledge of them, and that can be gained either by killing them or studying them. Knowing me, I went down the route of just fighting them until I got my research level up. The next thing to come at me was this Zoator, which was something I actually really wanted to tame, so I was going to make an effort to try and study it. Another one I wanted to try and get was this thing called a Morok. However, I wasn't quite willing to go out and fight it up close. Even during the day I managed to get myself into a little bit of trouble when this ashen coloured Venturaptor came at me. It did a little bit more damage than I hoped it would. There was seemingly no end to these creatures, they just spawned endlessly. There honestly was no end to these creatures at this point, but I toughed it out. By the time the next night came around, I was ready for another go, and this time I started using treats to get my research level up. Apparently I forgot that the Soul Gazer was a thing at this point. So I just kept letting them come, and I just kept killing them. Now that my Venturaptor knowledge was almost complete, I decided to actually have a go at taming this one. I was hoping to get a higher level or a rarer variant one, but I had the opportunity and I took it. And now I had my first tamed creature in this 100 days. I made sure to get it safely back to base as soon as I could so it didn't accidentally get killed by something while I was out battling. I saddled it up and now I could ride it around. And these things are fast and they glide pretty high. Next night it was back to it again, and now I was starting to try and bring in these Moroks so I could get their research level up. I made dragon treats so I could tame them. I still had forgotten that the Soul Gazer was a thing, and I was just using treats all the way. After a bit of grinding, I eventually managed to get this thing close. I was finally able to get its research level to level 2. And with that, I had my very own Morok, saddled up and armoured and ready to fly. But I wasn't done yet, I was back for another go. This time I wanted to try and get some rarer variants. I thought I was about to get lucky by taming a Scarlet Feridon. Unfortunately this attention-seeking Venturaptor jumped in and it all got a bit chaotic and the Feridon ended up dying. And it was disappointing, but there'd be more later on. At this point, it just seemed like everything wanted to have a go at me all the time now. Although it wasn't a rare variant, I did decide to go ahead and tame the next Pterodon that came down. It was only level 2, but it was still worth taming. Back at base, I continued to saddle up and armour up all my creatures so that not only could I ride them, but they wouldn't actually die in battle so easily. After many nights of battling these creatures, my armour was starting to wear down because it didn't have mending on it, so my next plan was to do librarian villagers and try and get a mending book. The first book that I got was actually a really good one, but it wasn't the one I was looking for, and I was going to have to go through quite a lot of these before I was actually going to find mending. In fact, it was going to take me several days, because they kept giving me terrible enchantments. 4 days later, mending finally appeared. At this point I had just racked up so many levels from battling hostile creatures that I didn't have to worry about the enchanting costs, and I got mending on everything pretty much straight away. I returned for one final go, and this time I managed to tame myself a Zoator. Once again, this was one of the ones that I really wanted to get. While trying to get it back through the Waystone, I accidentally triggered a raid, but I decided I didn't want to stick around and fight it because I didn't want my creatures to accidentally die again in battle that they didn't need to fight. As I got my new dragon back to Spawn Village, this Iron Golem tried to kill it for absolutely no reason, so I ended up having to fight the golem off. In the end, I just had to find it a home outside the village and leave it there, so it wouldn't get attacked again. I used up the last of my diamonds to make a dragon saddle for it, and then I took it out for a ride. These things make pretty hefty mounts, and they can block all attacks with their wings. They make nice little walking shields. At this point in the challenge, I wanted to start trying things that I never actually got around to in the previous version, and that is soul binding my pets. At this point I remembered that the Soul Gazer was a thing and that I could have been using it earlier on, but never mind. Unfortunately, since I'd used the last of my diamonds making the saddle for these dragons, I would have to go out and find more diamonds in the world. And this pillager learned very quickly not to attack a Morok rider because you will get devoured by the dragon. The pillager factories that I found were a little bit stingy on diamonds at first. At least until I found this one, where I found 12 diamonds in one chest, which has got to be a record for one of these places. With all the diamonds I needed, it was back to Spawn Village, and once again the Iron Golem tried to kill my pets. It was lucky to still be alive at this point. With the diamonds and the ender pearls that I collected from my cleric villager, I made my first soul stone, meaning this Morok was now bound to my soul, apparently, meaning it would respawn after death. I now had pretty much everything I needed to take on the biggest challenges of this mod, except potions. So, even though the Nether nearly killed me last time, I decided to take a risk and make another portal away from my base this time, and I took a trip into the Nether in the search of a Nether wart. I decided it was safest just to tunnel down to the lower levels, and thankfully I found another mineshaft where I could get soul sand and hopefully some nether wart. While travelling through the mineshaft, I came across this thing which reminded me of the old video game Doom, which I think it's based off. I didn't want to take any risks with it, so I just did what I do and killed it. I then realised that it had given me nether wart, the first mob I killed in the nether, and I already had what I needed. It was time to go back to the overworld and grow it. No need to stick around here. I decided to accelerate the process of gathering nether materials by putting down a load of lava and killing all the lava creatures that came out of it for extra nether resources. Again, most of these creatures at this point were just annoying rather than actually threatening, and I took them down pretty easily. I also used the Soul Gazer just to get a few extra levels towards level 2 knowledge. I never got around to taming any of them though. And after a few days of having to wait around for my nether wart to grow, I finally had a pretty good selection of potions, and that was it. I had everything I needed to take on the toughest challenges of this mod now. I also spent a few days learning how to summon pets and summon creatures. I spent a few days just getting used to it and sorting out the keybinds so I could actually use it. I decided to go in search of some Lycanites dungeons. The first one I found though was underwater and only had one boss in it. Wasn't really worth fighting. A few minutes later I came across a second one though, and this one had a few more bosses in it, and it wasn't underwater, which would have been very inconvenient. I broke in to find an absolute horde of vanilla mobs. These were going to be the least of my worries over the next few hours. And apparently even vanilla mobs have a few surprises to throw out in this mob pack with a random beast attacking me. I decided not to use the stairs provided by the dungeon and dig my own way in so that I'd have a very easy way out if I got trapped. I got a very warm welcome from a verdant groom, which was a nasty enemy. I also encountered some geckos for the first time ever. These dungeons are ridiculous. I couldn't even get through the first room for probably about 20 minutes because every time I took a step inside, more and more monsters rushed out at me. Even after I broke the spawners, they were still everywhere. I was constantly having to retreat back to my spawn area just to get myself reset and wait for all the negative effects to wear off. Thankfully I had an antidote vessel that was reducing the length of these effects. Even so, there were just so many of these creatures and they were just coming at me constantly. Now I had these giant green tarantulas which were just the least of my worries. And of course there were more grues, especially powerful grues, and some of them were actually able to get me down quite a few hearts. Thankfully, my combination of lifesteal and thorns was allowing me to take down pretty much anything that came my way. I decided to try summoning for the first time and brought some minions out. Unfortunately, they actually ended up getting in the way more than they helped, so I decided not to continue using them. Half the time they didn't even help me out, they just got stuck and let me do all the work myself. Finally, I was able to break into the later rooms and break all the spawners. Then I quickly lit everything up with as many torches as I could so nothing else would spawn in here. At least that's what I hoped, because now I was being attacked by darklings, which was really the last thing I needed at this point. It was never ending, the stream of enemies that were coming at me. I decided now it was time to start bringing out some strength potions. But there were just, again, so many mobs, I didn't even think it was making that much difference. This was just getting more and more chaotic by the minute. I was getting more and more powerful enemies, more and more rare variants of the enemies coming out, and this Gru actually got me down quite low and managed to steal my absorption effect after I got it on. Again, thankfully, Thorns and Lifesteal really saved me here. I just had to resort to blocking entrances so that nothing could sneak up behind me. And that proved effective because I was finally able to corner and defeat the first of the 3 bosses. Again, I did not want to use these stairs to go down, so I decided to dig my own path in, so I had a very easy way out if I needed it. Next level down, there were all sorts of different enemies to fight, including these weird poisonous frogs. At this point, I think I'd been in the dungeon for over an hour and I'd only just got down to the 2nd level. That is how constant the stream of enemies was. But I just pressed on, I carried on breaking spawners, I carried on fighting off the waves of everything that was coming at me. I managed to find the 2nd boss. Unfortunately for it, it was too tall to get through the hole to reach me, so I was able to shoot it down from a distance. And despite a few Venturaptors getting in the way, that was boss number 2 down. Now it was time to dig down to the lowest level, and oh my god, there were some ridiculous things down here. This Spectre's gravity effect would have pulled me out of my safe space had I broken another block and made a 2-block space. I was very lucky that I only broke 1 block. That could have been the end of me. I really wanted to take the lowest level on, but when you're 13 days out from the end of a challenge and you're playing in hardcore, you really don't want to take any silly risks, so I decided it wasn't worth it, and I went looking for another dungeon. The next dungeon I came across was one called the Aberrant Station, which are apparently even more dangerous than the other ones, and this one was ridiculous. I could not even get into the first room. By the time I'd finished killing the creatures that spawned in one wave, another wave spawned, even more strong than the last one. I spent about 15 minutes shooting down everything that came at me, and I just could not get into the room, because even vanilla mobs just kept overwhelming me. In the end, I just got fed up and decided to go and move on to the next step. Now it was time for the final battle. I threw my first Eye of Ender, and it was off to the stronghold. As I arrived at the stronghold, I was not at all surprised to find that it had actually spawned inside one of the main Lycanites dungeons, which is typical of my stronghold luck. There were a few annoying monsters in here to deal with, but nothing like what I dealt with before. Once I found the portal room, all I had to do was clear out a few annoying little monsters that just were annoyances rather than threats, and it was time to open the portal. I decided to set up a waystone and a bed which would give me a respawn point in a safe place when I got out, and I set up my inventory with everything, I mean everything I could possibly need for this battle. I jumped into the end dimension and I pulled straight across. I wasn't going to risk going over the void. And it was time to bring my secret weapon straight out. I summoned my Morok and I flew up on it, and this was going to be a really cheesy way of breaking all the crystals. All I had to do was avoid being hit by the Ender Dragon, and I could just fly around and break all the crystals off the top of the pillars, with the exception of the caged ones. This tactic saved me so much stress, and I had all the crystals on the tallest towers down in a minute. While doing this, I had managed to anger quite a few Endermen, and I ended up getting chased the moment I got down, and my Morok had to get involved again to help me. Now the monsters in here were spawning, but this time I was ready for them. I knew what was coming at me, I knew what I needed to do to survive, and I was not going to let them kill me a second time. I had so many hostile creatures after me. I had tremors, I had a weird thing called an Argus coming after me. I couldn't even land a water bucket because I was flying all over the place randomly. This fight got chaotic, and it got chaotic quickly. There was all sorts of things after me all over the place. I was being thrown into the air, and I was having to pearl down to avoid taking full damage. Eventually I managed to get some breathing space to blow up the caged crystals. I also shot down these spectres before they could get anywhere near me because I know what they can do. And I pretty much decided to shoot down anything that got near me or anything that could cause problems for me. I had inexplicably managed to miss a crystal, so I quickly took that one out, but it turned out there was another one hiding inside a weird structure in the end that I'd never seen before in any of my previous games. I shot down the hidden end crystal. This house actually provided some decent cover where I could shoot the dragon from. However, the dragon didn't seem to want to go down easily, and it dodged and weaved around all of my shots. Now it was just a case of, could I survive against these creatures long enough to wait for my opportunity to shoot the dragon down without being attacked by something. It turned into a chase with me flinging ender pearls around to get away from creatures every time they got near me. And any time I was in the clear, taking shots at the dragon and gradually wearing its health down. Instead of going in to try and take the dragon out on its perch, I waited for it to come off and then took the clean shots while it was close to the ground. All I had to do now was pearl around a few more times until I got another opening to finish it off with a kill shot. But very quickly, I managed to kill it just before it landed. As it did its little death animation, I got swarmed by a crazy number of these void trites, and again I had to fling pearls around randomly to avoid being sucked in by this spectre. Once the portal was open, I pearled over to it, and I just managed to get through before this spectre could suck me in, and it was done. I was through. I'd beaten the thing that beat me last time. And that was that. There were only a few days left. I did not have time to start anything new in the 7 days that remained, so I just survived until day 100. In the few days I had left, I set up this ender bag full of all the useful items I had gathered throughout the 100 days, ready for another adventure possibly. I haven't got any plan to do 200 days in this world or do a sequel, but if this video becomes the most viewed and most liked video on my channel this year, I will do 200 days. So make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and let me know in the comments what you want to see me do next. Continuation of this world or something new.